Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Fortifying Your Faith. My name is Haston Hanley, and I'm so glad you can be with us today as we are going to be continuing our season-long discussion about the need to continue to grow. Last season, as we discussed, we looked at relaying the foundation, looking at those basic things that we as Christians need to know and need to understand, so that way we can build a proper foundation underneath it. This season, however, we're looking at the things that we need to add on top of the foundation. If we look at ourselves as a house, let's say, and we have already laid the foundation, a foundation in and of itself is not a house. So, as we begin this season and continue through this season, I want us to look at the need about continuing to grow. But last week, we spent some time looking at 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. Peter would write, "Giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, virtue knowledge, knowledge temperance, temperance patience, and so on and so forth." But this week, as we look at that fundamental group of things that we are supposed to grow in, let's look at the one that perhaps gets most often overlooked, and it is growing in faith. Because the truth is, if we are to add to our faith virtue, and add to our virtue knowledge, and continuing on down the line, we have to be adding to our faith. Or at the bare minimum, we have to realize that our faith is something that is fundamental to the rest of our Christian growth. So, in looking at this, let's first be objective. Let's first stop and realize and ask a question: what is faith? If we look at the Bible, and even within the pages of the New Testament, there are several examples and several statements about faith. So which one is it? Is it our personal faith? Is it that saving faith? Maybe it's the system of faith that's discussed throughout the New Testament, which is really and truly just the New Testament gospel. Well, for growing in the faith and growing in this faith, I want us to take a moment to realize that if we're growing in it and adding it to our repertoire of diverse abilities and diverse things and characteristics as a Christian, then it must, of necessity then, be the personal faith. I cannot add to the gospel. I cannot bring in this extra element of the gospel, but what I can do is grow my own personal faith. So for a minute or two, let's look at just a few quick passages. Hebrews chapter 11, perhaps one of the most common when we are discussing faith. The Hebrew writer says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, and for by it the elders, or those who have gone on before us, have obtained a good report." So, if we're looking at this objectively and we're trying to see what exactly this faith is, it is understanding that even though we might not be able to see something, there is still that substance of faith, that substance of things that we know are going to happen. In fact, he would go on to say, it is the evidence of things not seen. We will get into this in a few minutes, Lord willing, but when we stop and we look at men and women throughout the faith, even being discussed in Hebrews chapter 11, there is a big difference between those who just had faith and those who had faith so much so that they were using it as evidence. They were using it as something tangible. Because God warned me about something, I now know without a shadow of a doubt that that's going to happen. I know God has promised this, so I'm going to count it as have already obtained that because I'm pressing towards it. See, that idea of having that evidence and that substance of a faith. If you skip down to verse 6, right after the Hebrew writer finishes talking about Enoch, he says of faith, without faith, it is impossible to please God. For he that comes to God must believe that he is. And within that statement is a fact of faith. If you are questioning if God is or if God isn't, then that's not faith. Without faith, we cannot please God. If we don't believe that God is, then we don't have faith, and therefore we cannot please God. So he says, is impossible to please God without faith, for he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them or those that diligently seek him. What an amazing thought to stop and realize that that personal faith is just knowing that God exists, knowing that God is a rewarder of me and of you if we simply determine and faithfully seek to follow after him. If we decide to give up on God tomorrow because we do not think that he is going to actually reward us, then our faith has lapsed. We're not going to be pleasing to God because we within ourselves are looking and objectively saying that God will not reward me, so we are becoming that self-fulfilling prophecy. But there's an amazing thing about faith, and really this idea is going to be going through pretty much the rest of our episodes and studies through this season. It's that faith, and with each one of these, knowledge, self-control, patience, godliness, brotherly love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, all of these different things. If we do not put them into practice, if we do not exercise that muscle, if we do not keep it going, then the fact is it's going to lapse. But we can strengthen it. We can grow in it. We can grow closer to God, and we can strengthen our faith through a few different things. For time's sake today, I just want us to go to James chapter 1. Beginning in verse 2, James says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse or various kinds of temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith works patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect or complete and entire, not wanting for anything. And if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, that gives to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given to him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering." So, I know we stopped in the middle of a verse there, but just looking at that, yes, we're in context, it's discussing patience, but I want us to realize that even within that discussion of patience, we are looking at a discussion and a look at and an idea of exercising that faith. Because when our patience is pushed, when we are being tempted, when we are being tested, we can look at our faith. And if our faith is structurally sound, if our faith is growing and it's muscular, it is fully developed even, then we can easily begin to see that it's easier to overcome. You stop and you think, and I think we've used this analogy before on fortifying your faith, but imagine working out and going to a gym. You are not going to walk up to a 50-pound weight and just immediately expect that to be the lightest thing. You don't start out with the largest of the barbells. You don't go to a 200-pound barbell. But what you do is you start with something That's easy. And over time, as you're exercising, as you're building those muscles, you begin to increase that weight that you're able to take on. If we are not growing in faith, if we are not maturing our faith, then we're not going to ever reach that spot. But how do we do that? Not only is it within that mindset and that reality of adding to it, not only are we in the sense of James chapter 1, count it all joy when we have the opportunity to grow, but we also see James chapter 2. What does it profit, beginning in verse 14? My brethren, though a man may say he has faith, and he doesn't have works, can faith save him, that being faith alone? If a brother or sister be naked or destitute of daily food, and one of you say to them, depart in peace, go ahead, be warmed and filled, notwithstanding you give them not those things which are needful for the body, what does it profit? Even so, if it hath not works, it is dead, or even so faith, if it hath not works, it is dead being alone. Yea, a man may say, thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Thou believest that there is one God, you believe as well. The devils also believe and tremble. Even with this basic idea and discussion of putting faith into action, James would go on to say, just a few verses later, verse 24, you see then how that by works a man is justified, and not by only having faith. Putting faith into action is when we begin to see that we are able to be right in the sight of God. We can't just say, well, I have faith, and just leave it at that. If we truly have faith, if we truly believe in God and believe what God has taught us through His Word, then we must see the need to be active, to desire to draw ever closer to Him, and to do exactly what He is saying. You look at Hebrews chapter 11 as a whole now. So we're looking at more than just those 3 verses from before. Abel offered a more pleasing sacrifice. Enoch, that preacher of righteousness according to Jude, he was taken because he lived faithfully. Noah, being warned of things to come, he had not seen rain, he had not seen a flood, and yet God told him to prepare an ark, and he did it. Their faith was continually growing because of the things that they had seen. Let's just even stop and look at Moses. Moses had told God at the burning bush, Exodus 3 and 4, God, I'm not going to do it. I'm not cut out for it. You want someone other than me. And then what happens at the end? By the time of the end of Moses' life, 40 years after he had been selected to be the leader of God's chosen people, you see a man whose faith is drastically different. You see a man who is faithful to God. You see a man who, through all of the wilderness wanderings, through the plagues, through even the discussion that he had with God at the burning bush, his faith was growing. If we do not ever exercise and use our faith, it will not grow. So keep growing in faith, because as we look at the next few verses or topics over the next few weeks as it ties back to 2 Peter 1 verses 5 through 7, all of these things are designed to be grown and used in tandem with each other. And so as we end this week and look forward to growing in knowledge next week, let's continue to pray for one another, pray for ourselves. Let's continue to grow and study and encourage those around us so that each one of us can fortify our faith.